Zoom recording. Play this. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Talea Grand. I'm a veterinarian here in McKinney, Texas. I have been practicing veterinary medicine for what's the math? Why can't I remember it? It's 5 o'clock. So 1996, 24 years and 3 days. 4 days. I graduated in 1996. I've done primarily Western medicine about 5 years ago. So 2015, I took an acupuncture class and started getting into Eastern medicine, and I've been studying it ever since. I am one thesis away from getting my master's in traditional Chinese veterinary medicine. And so I found that Eastern medicine is very powerful as far as complementing what Western medicine can do. And one of the ways we use it a lot is in allergies, because allergies is something we see in Texas all the time. I wouldn't say 24/7. It's not necessarily year round, but it definitely is a problem. And about 80% of our patients have scratching, itching, infections, ear infections. And we're going to talk about how we can look at that from both a Western and an Eastern perspective. Joining us as panelist is Dr. Lola Rojas. Say hi.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I recently graduated in August of last year. I graduated vet school. Dr. Grand kind of took me under her wing while I go through the licensing process so I can start practicing veterinary medicine here in the U.S. I'm from Colombia, so yeah.
You're not from Colombia, you're from New Jersey.
That's true.
You just went to vet school in Colombia because you have family there. There's a difference. So Lola's going to tell us what happens kind of during this thing, and if you need to ask questions, I want this to be a conversation, not just you listening to me drone on, but if you get lost, if you have questions, please, Lola, how do people do that?
Yeah, so there's two different ways we can do that. At the very bottom of the Zoom, you have two different buttons. One of them is called chat. You can put the chat on there and it'll say to all panelists, so you can feel free to write your question there, and based on what your question is, either I'll kind of interrupt Dr. Grand, or if I don't say anything immediately, it's because it's something that we're going to cover later on. And then there's also a button that's Q&A. You can ask questions there, and I can either answer them or I can ask Dr. Grand throughout the presentation. So that's how we kind of manage questions.
And feel free to interrupt. I'm not one of those, I have to do it this way. I like being interrupted. I like kind of flowing conversations, so feel free to ask away. So we're going to talk about our itchy, scratchy, infected dogs. We're going to talk about what allergies are, what to do about them, and how to do it, a little bit about how to do it. So let's kind of jump right in. There's a professor of mine at Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine. His name is Dr. Willard, and we have what's called Willardisms. And he gave us a lot of just sayings. They're like Chinese proverbs, just sayings that really stuck with me over the last 24 years. And one of the first ones he said is, it's not okay to just do the right thing. You have to do the right thing at the right time. And really, this is allergies in a nutshell, because if you do the right thing at the wrong time, you're not going to get an effect. You have to do the right thing at the right time, and you have to identify what's right and what you're doing wrong, and why things can be effective in one instance and not in the other, and frankly be effective one day and then 3 months later be completely ineffective. So one of the things I want to do is look at I think we decided this was an analogy instead of a metaphor, is I want to kind of picture allergies as a fire. And we're going to look at, what are these fires? Do we have a campfire? Do we have a house fire? Do we have a forest fire? I mean, obviously, it's really working on management and control, because campfires are much easier to control and manage than, say, a forest fire, or the forest. My words aren't working today. Forest fire. So how do we control them? Campfires, obviously you can pour a bucket of water on there, a cup of water, you can definitely manage them. But would you really manage a house fire with a cup or a bucket of water? Not really. You really want to call in the fire department. But a lot of house fires, you really only have one or two fire departments. Whereas if you have a forest fire, you're going to get multiple people. You're going to have multiple agencies. You're going to have National Guard. You're going to have the forest rangers. You're going to have people working together because this thing is so out of control that you have to use a lot more resources to be able to control them. We also want to look at the timing of them, because the timing of them is important as to if you have a forest fire all the time, obviously you're going to want all of your resources. But what if you don't have a forest fire? What if you have a camp or a house fire and you can use some resources? God, today I'm not talking about, sorry, resources to get that house fire down to a campfire. And then if you have a campfire, use your cups of water, right? What if cups of water don't work? You have, campfire again, more cups of water, keep going back and forth. Then as that campfire may get a little out of control, you may end up with a bigger fire, calling in more resources. And then hopefully, we really hope that your pet isn't a forest fire where you have to call in a lot of things. Because forest fires, we really want to prevent. And we don't want your animal being out of control, itchy, scratchy, and infected all the time. A really big question we have with allergies is they're chronic. They are long-term chronic conditions, and can we prevent them? It would be really nice to prevent them. And when we think about preventing forest fires, we get these pictures in our minds of nice, peaceful, and I actually Googled, I think, tranquility and peace and Zen. And I was coming up with all these really peaceful images, and it was not surprising to me that all of them contain water, because water can really cool things down. And so we're going to talk a lot about actually cooling your dog down physically, as well as cooling down the fires that cause allergies. So let's talk a little bit about forest fires. If you do have a dog that's out of control, if they are year-round itchy and they have horrible skin and their hair is falling out and they're itchy, scratchy all the time, Western-wise, we can use medications, we can use supplementations, we can use specialty diets. We've got all sorts of testing like thyroid testing, hypoallergenic testing, where we actually figure out what they're allergic to and hyposensitize them. Your resources in that point is not just your veterinarian, but it's also a board certified veterinary dermatologist. And there is such a thing. They go through residencies just like human doctors do, and they specialized in skin. They do a lot of really good work. They are basically our National Guard as far as fire departments go. In Eastern medicine, we tend to use things that balance the body. What we do in Eastern medicine is a little bit different than Western medicine. We're going to talk a lot about balance in Eastern medicine. We're going to talk a lot about symptom control in Western medicine. Eastern medicine uses herbs, acupuncture, food therapy, supplements. We try to figure out what pattern your dog is. We'll talk a little bit about patterning and how we look at Eastern. It's not as a diagnosis, but as a pattern, and how we can use patterns to unravel what is imbalanced in the body. The good thing about that, or the bad thing about that, is you kind of do, not a specialty center, we haven't done residencies per se, but we have gone to school for a minimum of 6 months. And if you're like me, I'm at 4.5 years later, and I haven't got my master's yet. And so we are talking a little bit higher education than just a regular DVM to be able to do this kind of level of Eastern medicine. We're going to talk a lot about food in the next ones too. So let's kind of go backwards a little bit and talk about house fires. We see a lot of house fires in my practice. I do have forest fires. I feel bad for them because they are so out of control. But mostly we see campfires and house fires. So house fires, we use Western medications, we use supplements, specialty diets still. We still have ways and means of reducing inflammation in the body and helping. We test, we do thyroid testing. But mostly it's about symptom control. It's about examination. It's about figuring out what's going on with them and preventing or relieving them of their symptoms. In Eastern medication, it's herbs, acupuncture, food therapy. So we do the same things, but it's different patterns. It's a different type of imbalance. So we still use the same things in Eastern medicine. It's just at a different level. So let's talk about campfires. Western medication, this is where it's appropriate to use over-the-counter medications like antihistamines, supplements, shampoos, wipes, and flushes. But you have to realize that in Western wise, these are cups of water. So you have to identify, is your pet a campfire or is your pet a house fire? Because if your pet is a house fire and you're throwing cups of water on it, you're not going to do much good. It's going to look like it's not effective. What it is, it's not enough. And we need to pull in much stronger reinforcements in the fire department rather than Zyrtec. Eastern medicine, this is where you still have the same thing, herbs, acupuncture, food therapy, and supplements. And our goal in Eastern medicine is balance, so you don't get campfires, you don't get house fires, and you prevent forest fires. So that's our goal in Eastern medicine, really, is to find that balance so this allergies aren't there. Because in Eastern medicine, they say that imbalance equals disease. So if you have a disease, you're imbalanced somewhere. And so we want to balance them so they don't get disease at all. So let's talk a little bit about therapy. Western therapy, as I said, is more symptomatic therapy. What we're doing is really relieving symptoms, relieving itch, inflammation, we're relieving infection, whereas Eastern, again, I said it's balancing the body. The Western, you have to consider what your cost is. Because in my experience, when your dog has allergies, it's going to continue to have allergies every year. If you have a campfire that builds to a house fire once a year, not a big deal. You're not going to cost a lot. But in my experience, as dogs get older, that house fire gets a little bigger. The campfire gets a little bit bigger. Everything gets a little bit drier. Everything gets a little bit more combustible. And so if you just reduce the symptoms and don't work on the balance, you're going to get escalating disease year after year after year, to where at first it's going to be campfires, then it's going to be campfire to house fires, then it's going to be more house fires, and you're going to end up in a forest fire. And we want to stop that. So let's look from a Western perspective about what are allergies. Allergies is basically inflammation and infection. Inflammation causes itch, it causes redness, it causes swelling. Infection, redness, itch, swelling, pain. So the inflammation and the infection go together. You can't really separate one from the other. And how has all this come about? Well, first of all, you have an inflammatory response to an antigen. Mast cells exist in our skin, well, in dog skin. In humans, when you have allergies, it exists in our sinus cavities. We have mast cells in our sinus cavities and around our eyes. Dogs, they're in their ears and in their skin and the feet. So these mast cells, and this is a mast cell, this little purple thing. And what you have in that mast cell, these little light purple things are red blood cells. So this is circulating blood. That is a mast cell. And those little dark purple granules are histamine. So histamine gets released when an antigen is attached to that cell, an antigen being like pollen or something you're allergic to. Histamine is released, and histamine causes tissue swelling. That's why we take antihistamines to reduce tissue swelling. Histamine also is itchy, and it leads to inflammation. So what we have is an inflammatory process. And when you have inflammation, you have a warm, dark, moist skin or tissue, and that leads to secondary infections. And secondary infections lead to more inflammation, and inflammation leads to more infection. And so you end up in this vicious cycle going around and around and around, where you have inflammation leading to infection and infection leading to inflammation. And then you just have an itchy red all over hot dog that's going to be itchy and scratchy and miserable. So we need to cut Western medicine cuts that inflammation with anti-inflammatories. We try to prevent it with antihistamines. We cut the infection with, whether it's a bacterial infection with antibiotics or it's a yeast or fungal infection with antifungals. We really have to identify which one is which. So when we look at what's causing allergies in Western medicine, really they say three things cause allergies: fleas, pollen, and food. A lot of people will blame it on grain in food. That is untrue. Grain never caused allergies. It's more the protein source. And I think, and once we get to the end of this, I think you will think too, that really it's not the source of what is in the kibble, it's the heat of the kibble itself. But we'll talk more about kibble and heat and metabolic heat and energetic heat and all that later. I do think there's a lot of allergies to food out there, but I don't think it's in the ingredients, because there's tons of novel proteins like kangaroo and venison and duck and rabbit, and those really don't seem to solve a whole lot of problems. They seem to have as much allergies as they do without that, with a regular protein source. And you'll hear a lot of people say, well, my dog's allergic to chicken because when they eat chicken, they flare up. We're going to find out later that chicken is a very hot food. And if you have hot food on inflammation, you're going to have more heat. It's like adding fuel to your fire. It's like standing at your house fire, throwing it in gasoline and wood. It's just going to cause more. So what do we say that is caused allergies in Eastern medicine? And to really think about that, we have to talk about balance. And to talk about balance, we have to go to our 5 elements. So we talk about our 5 elements here. In a previous webinar, the 5 elements and 4 treasures, I go into a little bit more in depth about these elements. So I'm going to fly through these as fast as I can. Our 5 elements are fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. Now, these are actually feeding and nurturing each other. For example, wood feeds fire, the ashes of fire feed the earth. Earth feeds and forms metal and ores in its belly. Metal nourishes water. There's so much minerals and metals in water, and water feeds the roots which grow the fire. So this is called a nourishing cycle. It's very, very symbiotic and flowing. But if we look at this at personalities or constitutions, I want to see you to see an interesting point where our constitutions or our personalities can really be categorized into these 5 elements. So let's take a look at the fire element. We've got metal element, personalities, water element, personalities, and wood personalities. But let's take a look at a fire. Fire dogs tend to be red. They tend to actually resemble the color they are. They tend to be up and happy and loud and playful and center of attention. Golden retrievers come to mind. And I think we've bred a lot of breeds to be specific personalities. And so they are following these elements. And certainly you can have a golden that's a little bit more aloof and a little bit more introverted. But by and large, they're very fiery creatures. Poodles are very fiery creatures. They're very up and princessy. People call them divas. You know, they like being in front of crowds, let's face it. Let's look at the wood element over here. The wood element is confident and dominant. They're very athletic. They're kind of in charge. So I think of things like breeds like Rottweilers and Dobermans, just very strong personalities, can be assertive, can be aggressive, much less so than a fire dog is. A fire dog will bite you and then say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. Where a wood dog will be like, they kind of warn you. They're like, I'm going to bite you. And then they do it. They follow through. But if you look at these in respect to yin and yang, where yin is cool and yang is hot, so you need a balance of both. You have both in there. You've got these elements that are hot-natured. Why can't I write? Hot-natured. So you've got these elements which are called yang elements. They're very hot elements. You've got these that are yin elements. They're cool, they're reserved, they're aloof, they're the introverts. So you've got the extroverts and the introverts, and then you have one neutral element. That's the mother element, very nourishing and steady. So if you look at these dogs, they run hot. And I don't know if you know of people, but I do. People who run hotter, people who run cooler. And we're talking about inside heat, not necessarily outside heat. But if you walk into a room, you're going to have some people who are hot and some people who are cool and some people who are neutral. And it's going to be the same temperature throughout that whole room. I would dare say those hot people are very hot natured. The cooler people are cooler natured. They're probably a little bit more reserved personality types. And then the neutral ones are more neutral. So if we look at these, when we look at the actual organ system that goes with these elements, they all track to 5 of the organ systems: heart, spleen, which is the GI tract, lung, kidney, and liver. And the interesting thing is if you look at your hotter elements, this can be a time of year cycle. So wood is considered in the springtime, fire is considered summertime, spleen is late summer harvest time. So you're reaping, you're mothering, you're pulling in all your nature's bounty. Lung is more fall. It's when you're kind of honing your tools. Kidney is winter. So if you look at these as a seasonal standpoint, these are pretty hot seasons. And look at what you're happening is allergies come about when it's hotter, it's warmer. You have your yang seasons and you end up with heat, and heat leads to fire. Another interesting thing you can notice is if you look at actual acupuncture meridians, the liver meridian tracks ears, and this is the gallbladder, but it's the husband or wife, it's the husband of the wife, which is liver, is in the ears, in the paws, and we see a lot of inflammation on their bellies. That's where we see a lot of this heat happening. So what you're seeing in Eastern medicine is you're seeing hot personality, you're seeing a hot time of year, and what's going to happen if you have a lot of heat? You're going to end up with a hot dog. We live in Texas. We automatically have a hot environment. And I will say that cooler environments, Chicago, Colorado, some of the cooler temperature environments don't have as much allergies as we do down here in the South, because we do have a hot environment. And look, we're feeding, remember I said food is hot. Anytime you process a food, you're going to add heat to it. And the more heat you add, the more dry it is. The more dry it is, the hotter it is. And so we're feeding hot food. So let's talk about hot food for a second. All processed food is hot. So as you cook it, you add heat. But you can imagine if you cook something lightly, it adds less heat than if you're drying it down to a little hard crunchy. I mean, does that look cooling to you? Do those crunchies look like they're going to cool you down, like a watermelon is going to cool you down on a hot summer day? And the answer would be no. So processing adds heat, and the higher the process, the longer the process, the drier the process, the hotter the food. So all kibble is hot. So what we're doing is we're taking these hot dogs, we've got a hot environment, and we're feeding them hot foods. And it's no wonder we've got inflammation. It's no wonder we have these bodies that are overheated, and this heat has to express itself somehow. And I think allergies are just an expression of the body being overheated all the time. And so what can we change? If we look back at this, yeah, you can change your environment. You can move to the Antarctic, you can move to Colorado, you can move to Chicago. But for some of us like me, that's not going to be an option. I will not live in a cold environment. I don't care if I have a hot dog. I'm just not going to live in a cold environment. Are you going to change your dog? And the answer to that is maybe next time I'll get a cooler natured dog. But a lot of people like hot dogs, and I love hot dogs. I mean, they're crazy, they're fun, they're energetic, they're happy. So you can't really change the hot dog in the hot environment, but can you change the food? And I think that's what we're going to focus on a lot of in Eastern medicine, is changing this one thing that we can control in an environment that we really can't control. So we want to basically stop forest fires. So do you pick Eastern? Do you pick Western? And the answer is it really depends. It depends on whether you have a house fire. It depends on whether you have a forest fire. It depends on whether you have a repeated house fire, repeated campfires, and you really want to just keep things under control. Do you want symptomatic therapy, Or do you keep having things come back over and over and over again, in which case you want to reach for the Eastern. If you just need symptomatic relief, reach for the Western. And then you can always do both. It's not going to hurt. So in treating forest fires, I think Western does a decent job with hyposensitization, thyroid test monitoring. You use your symptom control like cytopoint, apical steroids, antibiotics, antifungals, hydrolyzed protein diets. We certainly can do well there. But I think if you take an Eastern view of it, where you're tonifying deficiencies, you're clearing heat, you're tonifying what is imbalanced and a deficiency in your dog, and you can use a lot of herbal therapies and acupuncture and food therapy, I think you can prevent forest fires. You can keep this from happening, because really forest fires are about control and prevention rather than treatment. Once you're in a treatment phase and Western phase, it's going to be hard to get ahead of it. And then Eastern can. So I think there you want to reach a lot more for Eastern with some Western than you want to in house fires. House fires, we also can use medicine supplements. We use steroids to reduce inflammation. Apical stops itch. Cytopoint stops the itch cycle. Antibiotics when you have infection, antifungals. Hopefully you only have a house fire once or twice a year. That would be great. If you have more house fires, we're headed to forest fire territory and you need something more. Eastern doesn't do as well with house fires. It works more to prevent house fires and forest fires than it does to treat them. So I can use herbs like Longdon Qigong, which is clearing liver heat. I can use external wind is for anti-itch. It's my herbal antihistamine. Damp heat skin is for infections. So really I'm treating the same things, but I do it lower and slower. Whereas sometimes I really just want quick and fast and symptom relief. So a lot of house fires, I reach for Western medicine because I want to get those symptoms out of there so that I can get ahead of it. And so I call in the fire department. I do a lot of symptom relief with house fires because these guys are miserable and we need to get them better. We need to get them better fast. And Eastern medicine doesn't do a very good job at fast. Now, can I keep it from getting to be a house fire? That is a big question mark, and I think I can. So campfires we can use antihistamines, we can use over-the-counter things at home, Benadryl. Everybody's like, well, I'll give my dog Benadryl, but it's not working. I would dare say that if you do have a dog where Benadryl isn't working, either one, you're not giving enough and they're not sleepy enough so they don't care if they itch, or possibly you have a house fire and you're sitting there throwing cups of water on a house fire. It's not going to work. It's just not going to be enough. We can try to use this preventatively to keep them. So definitely in March before allergy season in April and May, you can start them on antihistamines. But if you have a campfire out of control, you have to recognize the difference between a campfire and a house fire. And really it's kind of itch level. How itchy are they? If they're not that itchy, and some people, you know, what I think is not that itchy and what you think is not that itchy may be two different things. And I'll try to, if you bring your dog into me, I'll try to recognize that and explain to you that this really isn't bad. I've seen much worse. But you can use medicated shampoos, oatmeal shampoos, chlorhexidrine, which is antibacterial shampoo. You can use wipes, flushes, sprays. There's all sorts of things out there. And when I see a lot of things treating one different thing, I usually say that one thing doesn't work well. So you just have to try things. But recognize when you have a house fire and you're just sitting there throwing cups of water, it's not going to work. Now, Eastern therapy, we've got to balance them. We've got to get them balanced so that the campfire doesn't happen. I will still get allergies in Eastern medicine. My dog he's an earth, I call him pretty true earth, but he still has itchy feet. Right now he's licking his feet. It's allergy season. We're having high pollens. He's licking his feet. I'm definitely giving him herbs for itchy feet. I really cook for him, and I think that calms him down. It doesn't make him inflamed. I will say he's not yet gotten an infection, knock on wood. He's not yet gotten an infection to where I need to call in steroids or reinforcements like antibiotics. So I really am balancing him with food and a little bit of herbs here and there and keeping him from getting out of control because we want to seasonally cool them down. Remember, these is about prevention. It's not about treatment. And so I think Eastern medicine does pretty good at prevention as well as Western medicine. I almost head for more Eastern than Western when I'm preventing, whereas Western is more for symptom control, and then both for your out of control forest fires. So remember this slide. We have 3 things that cause allergies: pollen and these nasty fleas, and food. On this, we can control 2 things here. We can control their food, because we're going to talk about that, but let's take fleas out of the equation, not only because they're ugly, but we can control those. Pollen, not so much. We can't really get rid of the pollen in the air. But remember, flea preventatives and Western medicine is all about the anti-medicine. They work, it works. Western medicine kills things beautifully. It is wonderful symptomatic control. Flea preventatives actually work well. They target the nervous systems of fleas, so theoretically they should not hurt us at all. I found that some of them cause upset stomachs. There are some that are a little bit more debilitating than others. Personally, I like Bravecto. I think it's a great flea control. It lasts for 3 months as opposed to NexGard, which is 1 month, so you don't have to give it to them as often. But really, 1 bite, 1 flea, you can have a really severe allergic reaction. And who wants fleas? Nobody wants fleas. Fleas are not necessary. So let's get rid of those, and let's control at least 1 thing in Western medicine that we can control. But where do you go with your balance in Eastern medicine? How do you balance them? What do you look for? What are you balancing? So let's talk about excesses versus deficiencies. We talked a little bit about clearing excesses and tonifying deficiencies, because they're really 2 different patterns. They can both be hot. You can be deficient hot, and you can be excess hot. So let's look at what the difference is. Excess hot is too much of something. Deficient hot is too little of something. So excess hot is August in Texas. It's 110 degrees outside. It is hot. That is excess. It's coming from the outside. A deficient hot is a deficiency in your yin. So remember, yin is our internal air conditioner. And the really classic example of a deficient yin would be a menopause, a hot flash. It is really not the outside that's making the heat. It's your inside yin, your inside air conditioner isn't balanced with your inside heater. So your inside heater takes over and you get a hot flash. And that is deficient. They're both hot, but they're treated differently. The excess heat is pretty easy to treat. You throw them in a pool, you go in air conditioning, you take off the parka, you're excess hot, so you just remove the heat source. But what happens, how do you treat a yin deficiency? And if you throw a menopausal woman into the same swimming pool, you're not going to cool them down, because the cooling is from the inside, not the outside. You're going to end up with a really pissed off menopausal woman. So what you have to do is you can clear excesses, but you have to tonify deficiencies. And Western medicine is not good at tonification. Western medicine is good at clearing excesses, at killing things. It's anti-medicine, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, anti-cancer, anti-neoplastic. Chemotherapies kill cancer, but it's not good at tonifying energy, tonifying that internal air conditioner to get it to work. So when we see excess patterns in Eastern medicine, we talk about something called heat, damp, and wind. These are acute symptoms. They happen pretty suddenly. They usually happen during a change in season. Heat really can be explained in Western medicine as inflammation. Damp in Western medicine is infection, and wind in Western medicine is itch. It's a 1-to-1 correlation. They're pretty much the same. There's a little variation if you get inside damp or outside wind versus inside wind, but we won't go into that. We're talking about excess pattern, which it comes on seasonally. The liver, the spring rises, your yang kind of comes up, and all of a sudden this wind happens, and seasonally you get more wind, and everything gets a little bit floppy and off balance. Your heat rises, your internal air conditioner may be a little bit broken, everything gets too hot, and you have to express that heat somehow. So, and we also look at the liver and gallbladder specifically during these times, because that's where the excess usually lives, is in feet and ears and the belly. Now, if we're talking deficient patterns, and these are the house fires that are happening over and over again. These are chronic symptoms. These are things that are harder to control. They're causing a heat that's more internal, so you can't just clear it. These are the ones, and the reason I kept saying that if you start with Western medicine and every year you keep just suppressing the symptoms, you're going to end up with a deficient pattern, and that Western medicine is going to be less and less effective over time. You're going to need to use it more and more, but then it's going to stop working because you really have deficient patterns. And we look a lot at yin deficiencies where your internal air conditioner is broken. If we look at air conditioners in a geological standpoint, Texas air conditioners break better and more than Chicago air conditioners. We use them more. We need them more. We have a hot environment here. We have got to use our air conditioners. So it only stands that if we have a hot dog in a hot environment and we're feeding them hot food, that we're going to break their air conditioners over time. And I think that's where the house fires keep coming back. We also look at something called blood deficiency. I don't see it that often, so we're really not going to talk about it too much. I have 2 cases right now that I think are blood deficient, and it's making them very itchy and very difficult to control, because it's not just their internal air conditioner that's broken. It's the blood that's bathing their cells is not nourishing the cells enough, and we're getting heat that way, and we're getting itch that way. And it's almost a cold itch as opposed to a hot itch. We won't talk about that much, and I hope you never become a client of mine that needs me to talk about that, because it's really frustrating. So what do we do from an Eastern approach? Because we talked about herbs and we talked about acupuncture, and yes, we can clear excesses with herbs. We can clear excesses with acupuncture, but really, let's talk about diet, because diet is the one thing that every animal has in common, that they all eat every day. And if we can possibly change their foods to where they're not so hot, and we can kind of balance their yin and their yang and balance their qi and their blood, maybe we won't end up with as many house fires, and we can prevent our forest fire. So let's talk about food in relation to energy versus action. We have food can give us energy. So we all know that we gives us energy, but if you look at energy as hot or cold, food can actually heat us up or cool us down. And the way I explain that is, look at what you want to eat on a summer day in Texas versus what you want to eat in the middle of January. What you want to eat in the middle of January is more like oatmeal. What you want to eat in summer is more like a watermelon right here. You've got barley, which is cooling. You've got mung beans, and we'll talk a little bit about those. Fish are very cooling. And nature will actually give us what is hot and cold. So anything that lives in or around water is cooling. Anything that's fuzzy and runs away from us as far as proteins go is hot. There are some exceptions to that. We'll go over that. But think about a lamb. A lamb is it's probably one of the hottest meats you can get, and so is venison, which is deer. I couldn't catch a lamb or a deer if I chased them. That's hot. Whereas fish, and especially white fish, is cooling. Now, if you take a fish and you warm it up, if you look at the temperature of the meat, lobster, which is red, is more hot. Salmon, which is orange, is more neutral. So the color of the meat will tell you what it is. If you look at pork and beef, they're both neutral, but pork is probably cooler because it's a whiter meat than beef, which is a redder meat. Poultries have some weird things. Duck is very cooling. Chicken is very hot. So you really want to pick things that are going to cool your dog down. And if you can pick cool foods that isn't kibble, and you can pick foods that have an action to them. So we talked about clearing. We talked about damp. What if you could pick foods that drain damp? What if you could pick foods that cool and drain damp so that they don't get infections, they don't get inflammation, and we don't get as many campfires. We don't get as many house fires, or we can take that campfire and prevent it from becoming a house fire. We can kind of make it a very small campfire, like what my dog has, as opposed to a big campfire or even an out of control campfire. So remember, we talked about kibble being hot food. So processing adds heat. The longer it's cooked, the hotter it is. We're feeding our dogs hot food. It doesn't matter if it's duck, if it's kibble, it's hot. It doesn't matter if it's whitefish, if it's kibble, it's hot. So you want to get away from kibble. Canned is probably not as processed as kibble. So canned food is cooler. So certainly you can use your cooler foods like duck, turkey, pork even, because it's cooler. But you definitely don't want to give your dog a pumpkin spice latte. So nutmeg is very hot. Pumpkin, it's orange, it's a squash that ripens in the winter. It by nature warms you up. Squashes are interesting. Summer squashes are cooling, winter squashes are warming. You need to be warmed up in the winter. You need to be cooled down in the summer. So really nature has told us what to eat. God has created this whole ecosystem and told us when to eat what where. Oatmeal, do you really want that bowl of oatmeal with cinnamon? Cinnamon is very warming. Oatmeal is very warming. Do you want to feed your dogs oatmeal on a 110-degree day? And I think the answer is no. But if we can start looking for foods and start picking foods that really benefit and cool down our fiery dogs, we don't care if we live in Chicago. We don't have to move because we can really use that one key element and cool them off. I want to take a moment to look at raw food at this point. So you've probably heard all the stories, raw foods solve my dog's problems. They're wonderful. They're allergies. They're not itching. Raw food is cold. By nature, it doesn't matter if you have hot venison or if you have venison. If you have raw venison, it's cooler than kibble venison. So raw food is by nature a fairly cool food. Now, here's the problem I have with raw is number one, I'm not going to feed my dog anything I'm not going to eat because, excuse me, of pathogens. I'm not going to take raw chicken from the grocery store and eat it because it has salmonella in it. I'm not going to take raw pork because it has trichinosis. I'm not going to eat, a lot of raw things, eggs, E. coli. I mean, these pathogens are nasty. You have to cook them to get rid of them, and cook them adds heat, but it doesn't add enough heat unless you're turning it into kibble for you to worry about it. But here's the thing about cold foods is if you have an animal with a very immature digestive tract, like a very young animal or a very old animal, you can cool them down and you can actually really hurt them with cold foods. You need to feed them more neutral to warming foods than you do cold foods. So I don't like raw. I say you can feed raw, and you can take a raw diet that comes in a frozen patty, and you can certainly heat up the patty, get rid of the pathogens, and feed it to your dog. I have no problem with that. Some have cans of raw, and then there's raw dehydrated. Raw dehydrated is not really raw because it's been dehydrated. That's processing. It's probably a little bit on the hotter side, but you can definitely pick raw dehydrated duck, which is much cooler than raw dehydrated chicken or salmon, which is a lot warmer of a meat. So I'm not a fan of raw foods. I've seen it really debilitate older patients. I've also seen salmonellosis, I've seen E. coli, I've seen some pretty bad GI diseases. So I try to tell my clients that if you have a young, healthy animal, you might want to cook it just a little bit just to get rid of the pathogens, or you find something that you can cook a little bit more and get rid of the pathogens. So let's start picking foods. So we know we have hot foods, we know we have cold foods, right? So these are a list of cool to cold foods. It's got proteins, it's got carbohydrates, it has vegetables, it's got fruits, it's got some spices like honey. Honey's not a spice, but salt. Green tea is cooling. A lot of people say, drink your green tea, it's antioxidant. It's really cooling. It's an antioxidant because oxidative damage is inflammation. So green tea acting as an antioxidant is cooling off that inflammation. Same thing, same process, different perspective, but the exact same process. So you want to pick foods that are cooling. And if you notice an interesting trend most of your cooling foods are green. They're going to be things that are a little bit green and moist, like cucumbers are going to have a high moisture content, and they're going to be really cool natured. So when you're in the grocery store, look at a fruit or vegetable and say, is it hot or is it cold? What color is it? Watermelon, even though it's red, is so moist and watery, it's got to be cool. It's just red, I think, to attract people to it. Celery, cool. You've got peppers. Do you have a green pepper or red pepper? The red pepper is probably a lot hotter than the green pepper, and the green pepper is probably on the hotter end of cool because it's a pepper, it's spicy, it's got a heat to it. So you can definitely pick a lot of foods, and these are foods, some of them you can find at the grocery store, like turkey. Some are a little bit harder to find at the grocery store, like alligator, but certainly you can find turtle. We don't really find that at grocery stores, but certainly you can pick some of these things for your dog and you can cook them. And we'll talk about cooking your foods in a second. We'll pick up a recipe. But then let's look at the actions. Let's drain damp. Interesting. Barley is both a cool food and a damp draining food. So if you have allergies, barley is a really good choice because you're going to drain the damp, plus you're going to cool them down. There's not a whole lot of foods out there with barley in it. Dog foods, there's no raw dog foods that I know of. Most raw dog foods are just meat. I think dogs need some carbohydrates. So get some barley at the grocery store, get some ground turkey and put them together, and you've got a nice cooling soup recipe. You can cook it, not give it to them raw, and you've got a nice cooling recipe. Mushrooms, mushrooms are very anti-cancer. Daikon radishes are very damp draining and also cooling. Now, if you look at a radish, you've got red radishes, which are on the warmer side, and daikon, which are on the greener side, so they're cooler side. They're harder to find at regular grocery stores. I find them in Asian markets. You can also find them at Sprouts and Whole Foods. And let's talk a little bit about mung beans. Mung beans are a very, very ancient treatment of inflammatory infectious conditions like acne. They use it in Asia during the summer to keep them cool. They just eat bowls of mung bean porridges to cool them off. And this is prior to air conditioners. So they use this to cool themselves down, and they will treat acne patients with mung beans. You can also, by the way, treat cholesterol with mung beans too. Cholesterol is very inflammatory, hot process. So mung beans are very good for your dog. Now, mung beans aren't something in Western world that we see a lot. You see it more in Asian. So I do find those at the Asian markets. I have seen them at Whole Foods. I think a client of mine said they saw them at Sprouts. You can find them online. I'm gonna go back a second and show you what a mung bean looks like. This is a mung bean. It looks like a green lentil. And they cook really well in soups or stews. You don't have to soak them overnight like kidney beans, dried kidney beans or anything. You can just kind of put them right in your soup and they'll cook to tender and pretty quickly. So definitely mung beans are a good option if you've got allergies. Daikon radishes, you've got barley. What if we want to tonify our yin? We live in a hot environment. We know we're going to break our air conditioner. So let's get some things in there that can tonify our air conditioner. Let's pick eggs, and really egg whites are probably the better part of the egg, but you can certainly do whole eggs, and you can give a whole egg as a snack. A lot of dogs, not the whole eggs. My dog tried to swallow it and choked himself. He just put it in his mouth and tried to swallow and was choking on it. So yeah, cut him up. Because some dogs will try to swallow them whole. But eggs are definitely a great snack to have. You've got pears, you've got more barley. There's a case to be had for barley because it's a very good yin tonic. Rabbit, I said that the energy of foods, and sometimes nature will tell you, and if it's fuzzy and can run away from you, it's hot, and if it's kind of stands there, it's neutral, and if you run up to it and it doesn't move, it's neutral. If it's in and around water, it's cool. Turkey is cooling, and it's really farm-raised turkey for the same reason farm-raised rabbit is cooling. Wild rabbit is hot. But rabbit is a good yin tonic, so it's really good for the air conditioner. And when you have farm-raised rabbit, which is what is in dog food, some of the raw patties out there, or that you're going to buy to cook. It's farm-raised rabbits. It's very cool in nature. So wild rabbit, if you're going out hunting, it's going to be hot, but it is a really good yin tonic. So I think rabbit, there's a case to be said, but rabbit you can't pick up at Market Street or Kroger. It's really difficult to get. You have to order it online. They do have some raw diets, and if you get the raw frozen rabbit patties, cook them. Because rabbit does contain pathogens too. But spinach is also a cooling food that's a really good yin tonic. I think those, if you have a menopausal woman in your life, you really need to feed them egg white egg white omelets with spinach, because you've got that yin kick with the egg white, you've got that cooling, you've got spinach being a yin tonic. I should be eating them every day, I think. Lemon and apples are good yin tonics, so those are good, apples are good snacks to give. So let's come up with a diet we can feed our dogs, because, you know, I keep talking about don't feed them kibble, don't feed them raw. Well, what can you feed them? Now, dog food is convenient. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't feed them dog food, but let's cook something for them. Let's actually give them some natural food that we can get at the grocery store that is good for them, that will be helpful for them and help cool them down a little bit. And so this is my cooling turkey stew. So we're gonna first pick a protein, and we're gonna pick turkey because, you know, I'd pick rabbit if we could buy it at the grocery store, but it's not. So I'm gonna pick turkey because it's nice and cooling, and it's also really easily available. I'm gonna pick barley and mung beans because I have already said yin tonics, drain damp, they're just good carbohydrate sources. The vegetables, celery, great for draining damp. Spinach, great for yin. I'm gonna pick my daikon, which is both a cool food and a damp draining food. And then I'm gonna put it all in a pot. I'm gonna put my dry goods in there, probably put maybe half a cup to a cup of barley, half a cup to a cup of mung beans, depending on how big my pot is. I'm probably gonna pick, my crock pot is an 8.5 quart crock pot, and I usually do about 4 pounds of meat in there, but if you have a smaller pot, pick less. You can't mess it up. Your dogs won't care. The worst thing that'll happen is they say I won't eat it. Most of them will. Hide the vegetables in there, cut up your celery, and you cook it until your meat's done, your barley's done, your mung beans and your celery's and your radishes are tender. You want to cook it in water. Water is very cooling. And beer. Interesting thing about beer, what is beer primarily made of? Barley. There's a reason we like beer on hot summer days. It drains our damp. It also cools us off. So beer does something. Now, I don't recommend giving your dog a bowl full of beer because we shouldn't be contributing to delinquency. Most of them are under 21. We shouldn't be giving them alcohol. But if you cook beer, if you put it in your stew and cook it to when your meat is done and your vegetables are done, you've cooked off the alcohol content. And what you're left with is flavor and barley. And so you've got the goodness of beer that drains that damp and that cools them down without actually giving them alcohol. So I do put beer in my dog stew. It's one of the things, whether I put a half a beer in or a whole beer, kind of depends on the day. If it's winter, I don't like being cooled down because I'm cold natured. I put the whole beer in there because he is kind of running a little bit hot. So I want more cooling on him. If it's summer and it's a Sunday and I'm hot, then I put a half a beer in there because I give him a half and I drink the other half. It really doesn't matter. I drink the other half because I'm a one and done. I really can't drink a whole beer. I can only drink a half. So it gives me the chance to have a little bit of beer without drinking the whole thing, or end up what I usually do is pour it out because I just can't do alcohol. So homemade diets are great. These are fabulous. But what we have to worry about in homemade diets is balancing them, because homemade diets are not balanced. And when I talk about balance, I'm talking about calcium, vitamins, minerals, and micronutrients. They are not balanced. Dog foods are balanced according to AAFCO standards. They've added calcium, they've balanced calcium phosphorus ratios, they've added vitamins B's and D's and C's, they've added minerals like copper and taurine and other micronutrients that they need. And so what you have is you've got hot balanced diets versus unbalanced cool diets, and how do you get them to meet? Well, we have three choices. We can either balance your homemade diet, and that's what I do with my puppy and my older dog, is I do recommend, if you have a forest fire, if you've got a chronic long-term condition in a dog, you probably need to be feeding them homemade diets. Now, you can balance a homemade diet with a board-certified veterinary nutritionist, and balanceit.com is a bunch of board-certified veterinary nutritionists who take your recipe and they look at what the ingredients are, they look up what is in that food, and they tell you how much or what to add to that food to balance it as far as calcium, vitamins, minerals, and micronutrients. And they have their own supplements that they'll say put in 2 tablespoons of this powder twice in each meal, and your homemade food will be balanced. We can balance it too, but I think, as Lola can attest, it's a lot of math, it's complicated. It takes us a long time to balance a homemade diet. So I have balanced my puppy's diet to where that's all he eats, but he had an autoimmune disease and he was very sick and almost died when he was about 8 to 9 months old. He's now 2 years old. He's off all his medications. The disease is, I'm hoping, in permanent remission. It usually, once you get them over this, they do go in permanent remission. But I also recognize that he's a little off. Puppies shouldn't be getting disease. He's always going to be a little imbalanced, so I have to really carefully watch what he eats. So you can definitely come to us and we can balance it. We don't like it. We do charge a lot less than Balance It. It probably takes us a lot longer than they do, but we can balance it if you need to. I hope you don't have a forest fire and don't need to, because my favorite thing to balance a dog's is to cheat. I don't mind cheating as long as you're not hurting anyone. And in this case, you're not hurting anyone, which means you take the balanced food that is regular dog food, and you take homemade food and you put them together, and you give them some dry food, or preferably canned food, or dehydrated raw food. And then you take your homemade food and you put them together. Now, your homemade food, especially that turkey stew we just talked about, you can certainly keep in the refrigerator. You can stick some in the freezer. You can keep it around. I make big batches. I cook about once a week for my dog. It lasts a little bit longer, so I build up. So about once a month, I take a week off. And I don't give him any dog food, but actually for my 17-and-a-half-year-old dog, I did. I mixed them. I gave her some dry food, and I probably should have given her a can, but I had her mostly on homemade, and I did add calcium and some micronutrients and vitamins to her food, so it wasn't as big of an issue. But I had the convenience and I had the health, and I combined them together. Because really, if you eat really well about 75 to 80% of the time, the 20% shouldn't matter that much. The other thing you can do is, and they have them online, I was trying to think about this last seminar, it's called Fresh Food for Dogs, has a line of dog foods that they're actually cooking for you. They're taking these recipes, they're adding calcium, they're adding micronutrients, and they're cooking for you. Honest Kitchen tends to be a little bit meat light. They tend not to have as much protein in them as I like. So when my clients are on Honest Kitchen, I tell them to add something like turkey to it, cook turkey and just add it. But they do have vegetables, they do have carbohydrates, and they do have the calcium already added. They're expensive, they're not cheap. Honest Kitchen, Chi Dog is a classmate of mine from the Chi Institute that studied and started her own food company and works with a woman who's a chef, actually, and they make different foods for the different constitutions, and they put more of a Chinese approach to it. And then there's the Fresh Farm Dogs. Some of these have some ingredients I don't particularly care for. They'll do turkey and oats. Well, turkey's cooling, but oats is warming. I'd rather have turkey and barley, and it's hard to find things like that. Oats are cheaper, so they tend to put oats and corn in as their carbohydrate source, and I want more like millet or barley, and they don't really have it. So certainly you can do this, but they aren't going to be picking the foods that you would be picking. So I say cheat. I say do both. If you have a healthy dog who has minor problems, cheat. Let's do both. So do you pick Eastern? Do you pick Western? Well, what's your goal? Do you want to balance your body so allergies don't get out of control? You want to really pick Eastern. Do you need symptomatic relief and prevention of symptoms? Sometimes you need Western, and sometimes you need them both. So definitely there's room for both and complement both and integrating both types of medicine. But I think a lot of what you can do at home for your pet is cool them off. We've got hot dogs in a hot environment. Is it any wonder that we have house fires and forest fires? They are a little out of control and they're hot. If you feel them, they're hot. They are just so hot. So let's start cooling them down. Let's start cooking for them and giving them foods that are a little bit more cooling. So I think that's it. That was a little bit shorter than the last time. Do we have any questions or any kind of, I know Lola brought up the last seminar that we did on allergies that really we see a lot of allergies. It's kind of the #1 thing we see a lot of in practice. It's about 80% of our practice is just itchy, scratchy dogs. And it can be frustrating for us and for clients to have a dog that's itchy, to have a dog that's scratchy all the time, and to keep treating it and saying, well, it's coming back. Well, yeah, it's coming back because it's springtime. You know, it's going to happen. We can't really control the pollens. We can't control that you have a hot dog. We can't control our environment. We live in Texas. But can we? Can we control their foods? And I think we see a lot where it is controllable. I had a friend who I was talking about all this stuff to in food, and he started cooking for his dog, and she hasn't had an ear infection in 2 years. She only really had it once a year, so she was more of a camp to a house fire once a year kind of dog, easily controllable, but it worked. Lola, do you got anything to add?
No, I think just the same, going off of kind of what you said, coming out of vet school, kind of one of the biggest things we're taught is, you know, the skin is an organ, as we know, and it is one of the longest, most frustrating kind of treatments to manage. So it's not something that we can do in a day, in a week. It's kind of like what you said, it's usually a month to longer process. So it can be really frustrating on your end as much as it is on our end. I think you brought up a great point last time when you said, we don't want to see you here. We don't. If we can avoid you coming, that'd be great. But it's hard with skin.
We don't want to recognize our patients or our clients because that means we see you a lot and that means they're sick. You know, frankly, we just don't want animals to be miserable and sick. So we don't want to know you. Okay, well, I think we're going to go for the day because we're closed, and we're going to go have a beer because it's getting hot. Maybe half a beer. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to call us anytime. We are going to be posting videos, so you can always look it up. I don't think we're going to have a seminar for another couple weeks because I don't have anything put together and we're getting kind of busy. But yeah, it's allergies. I think we can start feeding our dogs better and picking our own foods better, picking, you know, tonifying our own yin, making sure our own air conditioners don't work. You know, we can subtly, for those we love, pick, you know, those men in our lives that are way too hot, have hypertension, hypercholesterol, they sweat all the time. Let's start slipping in a little celery. Let's start slipping in a little mung beans. Let's start feeding them more turkey instead of chicken, which is really hot foods, and try to cool them down. I think we can do a lot for everybody, every being out there that we love. So thank you for coming. I hopefully will see you sometime soon. We'll have another seminar coming up. I think I'm going to talk about probably arthritis. That's another big one we see a lot. And have a happy Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. Yay! So bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.